Well, this is exciting. Today, I'm happy to talk with Mike Barrett from Gospel Podcast. And we've been friends on YouTube now for a couple of months, but we haven't sat down and really talked about Mike's backstory and where he's come from and what his path has been with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we're going to have an interview today, and I'm really excited to get to know more about him and to learn about his story. And I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Thank
you, let's get started, Mike.
Yeah, never been interviewed before.
That's great. So I guess one thing that occurs to me is I don't know very much about how you grew up in the church. Would you mind talking a little bit about your early life and some of your formative moments in the gospel?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in a really small town in Ohio, about 1,500 people. My grandmother lived in that town her entire life. A little house by the railroad tracks that used to be a train depot. Everybody in the town knew her, and she lived to be like 98 years old. And so it was kind of a interesting culture, just living in that environment. I loved the small town feel. But my grandfather and great grandfather were visited by missionaries in Ohio from the RLDS church. This would have been after it was restructured. Joseph Smith III took his place as a prophet, which would be the son of Joseph Jr. and leader of the church. A couple of missionaries came to that little town and were preaching the gospel, and my great grandfather accepted that, and a bunch of people were baptized. It was one of those stories. Maybe you've heard of some of these, but they went out and broke ice on a little pond and got baptized.
Wow.
And accepted the gospel. The little church we attended was a little white church on the corner of Maple Street or Crocker Street. Anyway, it was moved into town back when there was no cars or anything by horses from the cemetery a good mile or so away, out in the country across from the cemetery. And they pulled it by horse and like big round poles, and rolled it into town.
Oh, if only someone had gotten a video of that.
Yeah. So I'm really bad at dates, but this was, pre-engines, any of that stuff. So hard manual labor, and the townspeople didn't want a bunch of quote Mormons, even though they were RLDS, not LDS, moving into town. And there was a big deal, and they put together a crowd to try to stop them, and a pretty bad storm came and dispersed the crowd, and the church moved into town. And that was the building that we were still worshiping in until I moved away from Ohio. So yeah, most of your listeners probably LDS. I grew up RLDS. My family, many generations. As a matter of fact, when my grandmother died, who was also in her late 90s, this would have been my dad's mom, I got my grandfather's patriarchal blessing, and I got another copy of a patriarchal blessing through my great grandfather. So four ones back, and she showed that to me, and I looked at that, and at the bottom it was signed by Hiram Smith. So Hiram Smith gave my great grandfather a priesthood, a patriarchal blessing, and also called him to the office of elder in that blessing.
Wow, that's amazing.
There was a prophecy there that said that this priesthood would continue until the Lord returned through that lineage.
Yeah.
Now, I just recently came across that within the last 20 years, I think, and I've got a copy of it. But that was pretty neat to me. I've had some changing thoughts and opinions now on priesthood and things, but I still.
Man, we need to talk about that later.
Yeah.
But how did that influence maybe when you became aware of that you had this, priesthood straight from Hiram Smith? Did it change kind of the way your seriousness with the gospel or your connection with your ancestors?
Honestly, no, not really. I found it neat. I found it neat to have that in my hand just from a historical perspective, and I've read it many times, but no, not really.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool. I had remembered reading about one of my grandfathers in the church history, RLDS church history. I think his picture or name's in there, but
yeah. I didn't even really know that the RLDS existed, I think, before maybe a couple of years ago. I mean, I think I'd heard of the RLDS church, but I didn't realize that there was more than maybe a handful of people, not the, congregations in lots of different churches, actually, that split off from the LDS church since its creation till Brigham Young went west. And so that, I mean, wasn't even aware of it. That's so cool. Did you feel any connection to the LDS church out in Utah?
I did, because of their numbers, right? So I was, I had nobody my age that was a man. There was a girl. Our families were really close. She was a year younger than me. That was the only one my age in our church. So when I went to school, there were no RLDS people there. I don't even think there were any LDS people there. We were a very German, Catholic, rural community. Most everybody I knew was Catholic. Most of the girls I dated were Catholic. So it was just a different culture. So I love the LDS, because when I would go on trips or vacations and I'd see an LDS church, I thought that was so cool, because I knew they believed in the Book of Mormon.
Wow.
And so I always was happy that at least there was a large body of people that the world did know about that could promote the Book of Mormon. This is my thought process when I'm back in junior high school years, college. Yeah. And I've met and known a number of LDS people. I think I told you when I went to college, one of my best friends was named Jerem, and he was an LDS person, and we were very, very close and had a good relationship.
Cool. Tell me a little bit about you as a kid growing up there in this old town with all this history. Did you still get into trouble?
My mom and dad were really strict.
Okay.
My mom was an ER nurse, and she saw the worst of the worst, and she was very protective. I wanted a motorcycle really bad. She would never let me have a motorcycle. So when I turned 18, I bought a motorcycle. I had it for about a year. But no, I didn't get into a whole lot of trouble. Mostly good kids, there was the usual partying and drinking and things, but just good character, good quality.
Yeah.
Kids.
I know from our conversations in the past, you went on into medicine and you even worked in the ER. Was this something that you got from your mom, or did it kind of grow naturally out of yourself?
Yeah. Well, for the time I was a little boy, I wanted to be a police officer. I was always enamored with the lights that went by, and I have this love for justice and, putting the bad guy away and don't let the little people get taken advantage of. And so I went to college at Bowling Green State University and got a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, and worked as a police officer for just a handful of years. And 2 missionaries came to town from Independence with a new program called the Youth Missionary Corps. And I knew both of these kids, young men, I should say, from a couple of church camps I'd traveled out to Missouri and went to. So I knew of them, but they came to our little town and spent some time there. And the next year I decided I wanted to put the Lord first in my life. And I took a sabbatical, or I walked away from the police department. My chief told me I'd have a place when I came back. And I traveled around for a year with my partner, whose name was Adam. He's been on here a couple of times. And we served as a youth missionaries. It's interesting. There used to be a program in our church a while ago, but we spent some time in California, and the man in charge of us out there was from Belgium, I want to say. He had grown up Catholic, I believe, came across the LDS church, joined the LDS church, found out about the RLDS church, and migrated to the RLDS church.
Wow.
But while he was in the LDS church, he was involved with the Missionary Training Corps, or Missionary Training School. And so he set our program up to mimic the LDS training. Like you have half a day of free time on Friday or on Mondays, and that's laundry and things. And then he expected us to be out all of the time. Of course, we didn't have anywhere near the tools that you guys have or the training, but it was interesting.
So pretty much, I mean, I didn't know this existed. It sounds a lot like my mission. So for a year you did this.
Yeah, and we traveled all over the United States to different places, and we would stay sometimes 3 months, sometimes 2 weeks, sometimes a weekend. Help with
the same companion the whole time.
Yep.
Oh boy,
it was quite a bit different. I mean, we just don't have the structure in place, but it was around for maybe 10 years or 8 years. I don't know. I've known a few other people that went out, but we only had like maybe 2 couples going out at a time, right?
Yeah.
There wasn't like hundreds or thousands. So,
And did you have many people that were interested? Did people treat you well? How did it go?
we had some success with baptisms. Most of the people we met with were contacts of families and friends. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And we did, yeah. So, but it was a year where I could spend in study. Okay, so this is before computer search engines and gospel scripture searches. And so I had a copy of I had these volumes that were so thick that a man in the RLDS church had done, where they did use a computer, but took every single word. So like the word Lord would be every single scripture verse in the Bible, Book of Mormon, D&C would have that there. And you'd have to physically look it up, but you would have every reference.
Oh, okay.
So we used those books to look up, if I want to study faith. It was tedious, no copy and paste, right? But so this is a mid-90s. This is like 95, 94 through 95.
That's a lot of legwork.
Ish, yeah.
What effect did you feel like that had, both the study and the mission, on you?
It was one of the best years of my life. It was twofold, really. One was spending time in prayer with my friend Adam.
Mm-hmm.
We would pray morning and night and several times during the day, and any times we were with families. We lived for a while in rural Iowa on a little farm, and so we could walk out our back door and there'd be a cow right by the fence. And I remember at one point reading the Book of Mormon on that back porch and just realizing that they weren't just people in a book, but now these were like real people. And I imagined, as I looked out in the rural area, that it was just this impression, like these are real people like you experiencing God. And it just became more than a book or a tool. It became alive to me. That's one thing I remember on that mission. I remember walking and talking a lot in the country to God. So it was kind of self-serving, but we were nowhere like pounding the pavement 10 hours a day like the LDS do.
That is so interesting. I read a lot, but I don't know if I've made that leap like you just said, like seeing them as real people. I'm gonna have to try that. That's a great idea.
Well, I said it was twofold. The other thing was, I think I learned what it was like to love and appreciate somebody, even though you have differences. And that was
your companion?
My companion, Adam.
Yeah.
There were times when we would be so frustrated with each other, so frustrated. And I gotta say, like, we have like the same sense of humor. He's hilarious. He's like my best friend now.
Yeah.
But during that mission times, you have those. It's like in a marriage. You're together all day long, and we weren't switching out partners or anything.
I can't imagine.
How awkward it is to have like silence in the apartment, and then you got to go on a visit and talk to people about Jesus, right?
Yep.
But it was never more than like a day, and it wasn't that often. Most of the time it was great, but there were times. But by the end of I think there was some competitiveness, maybe, or some jealousies at the beginning, because we were also both newly ordained members of the priesthood.
Okay.
Both to the office of priest, and we can get into that later, whatever. Our callings and things are different. And so I'm trying to explore what this means to be a minister. I'm remembering all of the Bible stories and stories in the scriptures in the early church of the miracles. And I thought, man, we are 2 men ordained with the powers of heaven. We've just walked into this little town. It's like the world is our oyster. God's going to open up the heavens, and that's where I think those were our expectations.
Yeah.
At least mine. But I learned over time, but I remember very, very vividly by the end of that year, our relationship had changed. And I appreciated him for his strengths. There was no jealousy there. He knew all of my weaknesses. I knew his weaknesses. We had learned to love one another over and above that. And I just, I realized the amount of work that took. And I realized that in our everyday relationships, number one, there's no impetus to make us do that with one another. We can walk away we have very limited interaction with friends, other than our immediate families.
Mm-hmm.
And so where in my lifetime have I ever had that ability and opportunity to learn to love somebody unconditionally and be thankful for their God-given talents and abilities and
What a
treat
great
them as a
preparation for marriage.
brother? Huh?
What a great preparation for marriage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was probably one of the biggest blessings. I also realized that some of our ideals and desires, I think, are unrealistic, as far as us talking about Zion and loving one another as ourselves. And I realized that even in our congregation, there is nowhere near enough time in my short 70 to 80-year lifespan, if I live that long, to work out that process with another person,
Mm-hmm.
let alone a whole congregation. And the idea that all of us in that congregation are going to learn to become one with each other and build those relationships are just unrealistic.
Yeah.
But what we can do is learn to become one with Jesus in our personal time and in our own stewardship of our own lives. And in that process of becoming one with him, if all of my brothers and sisters are doing that as well, then you will have that bonding, though I may not know all of the deep mysteries of their sins and their failures and their doubt. I'm not going to learn everything about it, but we will become one as far as our desires and our love for Jesus, and that'll transmit to our love for each other. And I think sometimes we go about that backwards. We want to build this kingdom. We want to learn how to have righteous businesses and interact and all of that. And in so doing, preparing a place for Jesus to return. And I think it's been flipped through our culture and through our experiences. And in my life experience, that just tells me that's just not going to work that way.
That brings me to another question I've had. I've heard you mention that you moved to Zion basically at a certain point in your life.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
Why, when it was in your life, and why you decided to move?
Sure. So I grew up maybe 2 hours west of Kirtland, Ohio. It's just east of Cleveland, up by Lake Erie. And so I don't know how many times we traveled there as a youth group, as a congregation. I remember we had access to the temple to have a worship service with our congregation there. My dad was pastor at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I've been there many times. It was a pilgrimage. It was a holy place. It was a place we loved to go to. And my mom grew up going to church camps on the campus where they would have tents and things outside around the temple, reunions.
In Kirtland.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea. That's
I
great.
didn't either. Yeah. And so the church was always number one in our lives. And mom and dad knew one day they would gather to independence based on revelation from Joseph Smith, where he appointed a temple lot and place for the temple in the middle of town to start the gathering for Zion. And like I said, I traveled around and did missionary work for a year in that time period. My mom and dad both transferred to Independence, Missouri, their jobs, and moved here. And I ended up moving out here after my mission for the purpose of being around like-minded people.
Yeah.
And gave up my job in the police department. That's later on. That's how I got into medicine and stuff.
Wow. Did you find them? Did you find like-minded people?
Yeah. Yeah, it was wonderful. I remember I was a young adult, mid-20s, met my first wife at a youth gathering. But on Wednesday nights, we'd have 60 or 80 young adults that would gather from different independent restoration congregations, and we'd have somebody teach a class, and then we'd go out to dinner afterwards, to hang out and fellowship. And I met a lot of people through that. And it was something I really looked forward to, something I never had. Never had I sat in a room with 60 plus people my age, learning about the gospel.
Was your congregation back home pretty small?
Yep. Maybe until the church split in 1984, probably 60, 70 people. Yeah. And after that, maybe 30, 40.
Boy, this sounds a lot like I don't know. So would you say it was a positive thing then to go there and to gather to Zion?
I think, yes, I am very, very thankful I ended up here. My current, and it's funny when I moved here and ended up buying a house, I bought a house just like 3 blocks north of the temple lot. I wanted to be right in the middle of the action. We have a
Yeah.
church school a block away that LDS, RLDS, Community of Christ, even people that aren't in the restoration go to.
Yeah.
And I wanted to be close to that. My son went there, graduated from there.
Yeah.
So yeah, everything was centered around that, meeting a companion of like faith, and that's why we ended up here, because of those beliefs.
Mike, I've heard you in your some of your videos. You guys have talked about Zion, and maybe Zion isn't necessarily the focus that it should be. That maybe what you thought it was, as in the physical location. But what you're saying seems like a great thing to me. Why wouldn't you want to gather with a bunch of people who are like-minded and have community? How do you marry those two ideas, that maybe we're not actually building Zion yet, and yet there are these positive experiences that come out of the
Yeah,
community?
that's a great question, and keep me on track, Matt, because I just had 100 thoughts floating
Oh
in my
boy.
mind.
Okay.
So, because of the nature of what we do and really focusing on the Book of Mormon, I've realized more and more things I don't think are cohesive. And because we point out those things, I know we're perceived by those who hold those things dear to them as anti-church, negative. I've been called one of the sons of, who was it? The sons of Zion Alma persecuting the church. We've been likened to that. I had a minister from another state that I've never met call us, I forget what he called us, the subterfuge of the restoration, something. I didn't. Um, some people perceive us as negative. I don't think it's a thing of evil versus good. I think it's something that's really good, really beneficial, but it's an enemy to what God intended, because like Corey said one time, if you leave California and your flight plan is just off by 1 degree, by the time you get to the other side of the country, you're way off from your
Yeah.
destination. And that's more of how I view the restoration. I wouldn't change anything growing up. I'm so thankful. But
The implications here are big for this. I'm trying to raise my children. You've got your son, and someday we'll have grandkids. And when I was, my life in the LDS church has all been like this pat community, all these, your whole life is laid out for you. Um, and all you have to do is just get in the program, and they'll kind of run your life for you.
mhm.
Picturing a life where maybe I don't believe wholeheartedly in the LDS church is fine for myself, but then I start to think of my kids. Where do I raise them? Where do they find community? Where do they have these experiences like you had, like Bible camp, and go in a place where you can date somebody that believes the same way you do? Where do they find that? I
Mhm.
mean, this is such a big question for me. Like, we want to have community with other people who believe in the Book of Mormon without falling into some of the prophecies the Book of Mormon has about the great and abominable church, and how there won't be any churches that are correct in the last days. And how do you find community without being tainted and having your flight plan altered by hanging around with other people who have their flight plan slightly different than yours?
Mhm.
This is a tough question. Do you have any thoughts, or have you come up against this before?
It is interesting. Like the school, I love that school. I support it. I support it in prayer. We've supported it financially. And I know that, there's religion classes there and things, but man, those teachers were such a big part of our son's life. And, they don't get paid a whole lot. And it's a service of love. They could make so much more in public schools.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such a beautiful picture of people working together for a common purpose, and that's trying to raise our children correctly, that are from different sides of different independent branches with, varying ideas of the gospel to some extent, not totally, off from each other, but definitely each branch has its own personality. And I love that school, but I know that there's also, at the same time, there's things being taught that I believe, if we don't change the message at some point, that many of those kids will age out and graduate and will lose their testimony, or will have their testimony changed. And I really, and so it's like a two-handed thing. But you can't, I don't believe that we just step away from everything and have a big vacuum and try to do a giant reset. I think that'll result in anarchy. And I believe that God still works with people, even though we may have gotten a lot of things wrong or taken things and added to them, that God doesn't write us off, and that our testimonies and things of his love that we have in our life will still, they all mean the same thing. Like God, I've got many testimonies, and I think the only thing different is I thought those testimonies came because of the church I belong to. And now I realize that miracles and testimonies that I've witnessed in my life were because God loves me and other people as his children, and not because we belong to a certain church.
Yeah.
And that might sound really obvious and weird, but I remember, Matt, very vividly walking up to a house in the middle of a bad part of Kansas City in a very deflated, rundown area. And as I was going to reach for the door to knock, I had this wave of almost panic wash over me because of, and this was a couple years ago, all of a sudden I saw myself as everybody else. Doesn't that sound weird? Just a Christian.
Oh,
No longer added protection and blessings and superpowers because of the church I belong to. I was like everybody else. And it almost took my breath away. And I thought, I can't believe how I had pushed fear away and just trusted in the Lord, because in my mind, it's like, yeah, I'm not the best guy in the world, but God doesn't have a lot of people that know about his true church. So he's using all of us messed up people to do and so he's going to protect us. And it's just a twisted way of thinking, but I thought I was special. I thought I had a little bit more truth and knowledge and insight into God than your normal average everyday Christian or person. And when I started thinking that maybe that's not true, I just felt almost just naked and vulnerable. And I thought anything could happen on these visits now, and I don't have any special protection. Isn't that weird?
it is really weird.
But it's part of the culture that we belong to, I think.
Yeah.
It's a mindset. It's a unhealthy behavior, but it's because of the power that we give to men in the name of priesthood and authority that sets us up to be a little bit better than each other.
Yeah.
Or other people.
Oh, man.
So that's kind of weird. I don't know if your listeners may not know, but it's so different because in the RLDS church in 1984, a revelation came out by our prophet, who was named Wallace B. Smith, great grandson, Joseph. And you got to think all of our leaders are very closely related to Joseph Jr., right? There was Joseph III, and I'm going to get these wrong because I haven't studied it in a long time, but there was like 3 prophets who were like brothers. And so it wasn't going, father, son, father, son. So when you get to like Wallace B, he's only a couple, I think a great grandson or a grandson, great grandson, probably. I should have read up on that. But anyway,
third.
Yeah. So we were very closely connected to original Joseph Jr., right? So in 1984, when Wallace B. Smith gave a revelation about building, it's time to work to start building the temple, it was like, oh my gosh, it's across the street from where Joseph Jr. placed the stone and dedicated the correct spot. That's not right. And then in that revelation, it was about, women had been being called to the priesthood, and we didn't even allow that in the church. And we knew a revelation was probably going to come. And sure enough, he put it out there that it's okay for women to be ordained into the priesthood.
Wow.
And that's where the church divided. It was we go to conference, and we have an auditorium that seats like 5,000 people right next to the temple lot in Independence. And you send delegates from all over the world, and they vote representing your branch. And so we vote on the revelation, whether we accept it as the word of God or not. And that's how our Doctrine and Covenants, this was section 156. So I don't know how many are in yours, but we continued to have revelations from our prophet and add to that book, way past Joseph Jr.
Why wouldn't you? If we believe in continuing revelation, why wouldn't you?
Yeah. So that was a really rough time. There were a number of branches that were very large in population. And I heard the stories of the World Church coming in during their meetings and removing the pastors and changing the locks on the doors, because all of the churches were owned by the corporate church. They had the deeds and so they would go in, and if the pastors were very conservative or were preaching against the revelation or not going along with it, making a stance, we're not ordaining women here.
They would take back the property.
Yes.
That's amazing.
So you got to think 1984, right? I was born in 71. I was 14 years old. I remember being in the balcony of the auditorium. I would sit up there and listen to the business and seeing people crying in the hallways and hearing my mom and dad's discussions in the evening during this week-long conference before the vote.
How did they take it?
It was rough. Our family was split in the little church we went to. Many of them went to a more left-wing or more liberal congregation, right? And many stayed in the conservative side. And so the RLDS church then morphed into the Community of Christ. And that was like the first step of many steps that just seemed to really push them far left, with their acceptance of, the Mormon churches deal with this, with LGBTQ, really downplaying the Book of Mormon, common communion, baptisms of other churches. I don't know how far they've gone now, but it does not even resemble the Kirtland era RLD or LDS church, prior to Nauvoo.
Man.
And so you have to think of the culture. We have not had one prophet over us. We haven't had stake presidents and bishops and apostles and 70, organization for 40 years.
The RLDS church. Okay.
Yeah. 40 years, independent restoration branches, which formed out of necessity to hold to what they thought was the true gospel. 40 years of just having a branch with nobody above you other than that branch. And we formed loose organizations. We meet in loose organizations, but that's how it ended up. And so it's not a big, we don't have this looming. So maybe some of the things you guys are experiencing on the LDS side, was experienced back in 84, where you're silenced and your priesthood was taken away, and even being locked out of your church with nowhere to go.
Yeah,
that all happened within us like 40 years ago.
Yeah, holy cow! So you're ahead of the game.
Right. So my heart really goes out to the LDS people who are being forced out of their churches due to their belief system.
Have you watched? We've talked a little bit about Justin Griffin and his second. Who Killed Joe Smith Part 2, and the part at the end where he goes up to the church and the doors are locked, and that was such a powerful part of the video. I know it's symbolic because there are times when you can walk inside, but the notion that the ownership of the church is locked. I remember when I met with my stake president this last summer, and he was highly critical of what I was doing, and I asked him, I said, who owns the church? And he didn't have an answer, but it's made me think of that since then quite a bit. Who owns the church and why? Is it the people or is it the top brass? And I know that the LDS church is actually a corporate soul. And so every single dollar and building is owned only by Russell M. Nelson until he dies. But I wonder, in your church, was it a group of people who tried to hold on to it like our current leadership is, and then in 1984, it kind of shattered and then everybody became owners of their own church building? Or how did that work?
Yeah, I will say, I think relationships now are 180 degrees different. It's almost like you do you and we'll do us. And as long as we all love one another, and really the love for law and order and maybe even truth, I think because of the way the church went, just didn't become important anymore. So there was nothing really to hold on to super tightly other than inclusiveness, right?
Yeah.
So, that's.
Do you think that's a net positive or a net negative, having not having a lot of structure or strict rules?
Yeah, I think it's both. For instance, my friend Corey, who's on the podcast, who started it with me, he attends a Community of Christ church, but it's if you looked at it, it would be reflective of like a Restoration branch, very conservative.
Okay.
He's free to teach whatever he wants, teaches the Book of Mormon. And so there's some freedom there, and there's nobody coming down on him. And I think at our branch, I've had letters sent to our pastor and quotes from social media, snapshotted out of context, these kind of things, telling them to punish me and silence us, things like that.
Because of your podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I almost feel like I'm very fortunate for the branch I go to, and I love it, and the people there are great. But I almost feel like maybe there's more freedom on the other side now. I don't know, to do what and say what you want without the cancel culture coming in.
This brings me to another question I've had. Mike, what do you think how would the ideal church look, let's say prior to, a second coming type of a situation?
Mm-hmm.
Can you paint a picture of what an ideal church would look like?
This is a great question. And we've been dealing with some of these questions because it always comes up, well, then if not what you had, then, if not that, then what? And I don't feel super qualified to say what. It's like, I'm just one little voice. But what we do is look at things that maybe other people have had. And I know there's been so many people that have had questions that we address because we hear from them, and they've always been shut down and had no place to talk about them. And so like that question you just asked has just never been explored or been allowed to be explored.
Never been allowed to. Yeah.
Allowed to be explored. And I don't think that it's super easy or that there's a good answer. I just think that I want a place where we can dialogue, and in so doing, take away traditions that have substituted themselves for Jesus Christ in a tight personal connectedness that we need to have to him, and move in that direction. And looking at these things, that's always the purpose, is to find the truth of the gospel. I was asked a while ago, how do you define the fullness of the gospel? And we could probably do that in different ways, and they'd all be true. But in my mind, I think the simple answer to me was the gospel is Jesus Christ dying for me and bringing me back home, doing something I could never have done because of my sins. That's just the plain gospel. Jesus died for us, and we have the ability to be forgiven, if we work the program. I'm not saying an easy prayer does it all at all. I'm not saying that at all. But that's the gospel. And so the fullness of the gospel to me is that story being presented in its simpleness and its beauty and its clarity to give us a great picture of who our God is, what he did for us, and where he wants us to go. And when the clearer we see that in its simplicity and in its beauty, that's what changes our hearts and allows our hearts to be changed. And when we keep mucking up that beautiful picture with throwing other things on it, it's like a little kid coming up and just whipping paint on this beautiful painting worth millions of dollars.
What a visual.
Yeah, you don't see the beauty anymore. And so that's the fullness of the gospel. And to me, that's what's contained in the Book of Mormon. And I don't remember your original question. How do we find a church like that? I think you're doing a good job on your channel by simply stating what the Book of Mormon says and then leaving it at that, rather than trying to pick out what's missing based on all of the added teachings we've all grown up with.
Oh man.
I had a beautiful, we had a long email from a very intelligent person who's very well thought out and was talking about priesthood and things. And like, how do you pull this out from the Book of Mormon? And the answer is you don't, because it's not in there. But we're looking at that through the Doctrine and Covenants lens, or through church history lens. And so, there's going to be things that aren't addressed or that are maybe missing, but I don't think we'd be asking the same questions if we didn't have all of this other stuff in our mind that we have to filter through now.
Right. And it's almost refreshing to just to start over, like leave all that alone, pick up
Mhm.
Mormon to me, and just be like, look at it from a child's eyes and be like, this is a new start. But if the gospel, like you say, is just a need to believe in Jesus Christ, that he is the one that's going to save us, why do we need a church? Why do we need each other?
Mhm. Well, I think the gospel is always twofold. The most important thing for me is what you pointed out, equality, and maybe what I described earlier in my lesson I learned from traveling for a year with my
Yeah.
missionary partner. Maybe it was like Paul and Peter or whoever was at you could tell the personality. Maybe it's what they learned in the New Testament. Learning just to put others' needs equal to you or above you is the purpose of the gospel. And I want to be able to do that in a simple way.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the way we've been raised, I think promotes the opposite, because we've been told that there's levels of resurrection and light to glories and celestial, terrestrial, all of that. I think that we tend to judge each other pretty harshly. And Matt, I just want God to see me as a better person than you so I can be in celestial kingdom.
Yeah.
In order for me to be in the best place with certain qualifications, certain works I had to do, certain ways I had to act in this life, then that means there's places where people didn't quite do all of that or weren't able to accomplish that. And they're in a lesser glory.
It's like a competition. What an interesting way of looking at it. You've heard the old saying, like, if you're in the wilderness, if you're out in the mountains and you see a bear, how fast do you have to run to get away from him? That's not the important thing. You just
Yeah.
run faster than your buddy, right?
As long as I could trip my buddy,
Yes, trip on my buddy so that I can get there. And that's kind
Right.
of what this whole ranking system, the celestial is about. It's not about being your best self. It's about being better than everybody else. And so compared to them, you get, wow.
And if I could feel good about myself because of the way I shine, because of the
Compared.
positions I hold in my branch, you would say our callings, or
Yeah.
teaching Sunday school, or we're running the Bible church camp this summer. I might not admit that, and a lot of people do those things just out of pure love for their heart. But there is a and this isn't a reflection of the congregation I go to. I'm just saying, as a group, as an overall body of people, we've had our congregations, fight with each other, and you don't have authority to do this, and you just called somebody to the office of 70, and we're not allowed to do that based on the Doctrine and Covenants and our unorganized state, and it just goes on, and we're always summing each other up and judging each other on our actions. And it's like, darn it, the Lord is not going to be pleased with you guys. You're not even allowed to come and serve food at our church camp because of your beliefs. And that's a absolutely honest reflection and a truth that what I just said that has happened.
Wow.
So you see that we don't admit it, right? But really, that is what our culture reflects. I've lost at least one super close friend that was my mentor and that I respected. And it's this child, unfriended me on Facebook, and we're done with you. You're leading people astray, and
that's so hard.
You see that something's missing, and we are victims of that culture.
Yeah, we are. We definitely are. In whatever branch of the LDS church we are in, or RLDS church. I had another question for you, besides what your ideal church would be, because I think you have community there, but what are...
Yeah, I never answered your question very well, did I?
No, that's fine.
This is what, in a simple way, this is my grandiose thing. We don't live and work together, and we don't work in the fields together. We go to the stores to buy our food. Each of us can have all of our needs met, living independently from each other.
Okay.
If I added up all the square miles that people drive to get to our church on a Sunday, we drive 30 minutes to get there. When I pass how many churches on the way? So we don't need each other for our basic needs.
Okay.
But if I picture a group of people who are so wanting to seek out Jesus and his presence and know him in their individual lives, so that they're all involved in the word and prayer and study each day, and giving to their communities and trying to live and to know him, that when we come together on Sunday, ideally, we're just there to worship our Creator. And because of our relationship during the week, we do that together. And there's a great joy and just knowing who our God is and who we are, just loved immensely, little creations of his. And and I don't think it's any harder than that. We are so blessed. We're so blessed to be created by a God that is love. And there's no fear when we all love him and love each other and carry each other's burdens. But man, you take all of the structure and priesthood meetings and everything, and now there has to be organization, and that's the hard part about church. Shane and I and Corey, we talk about this a lot. As soon as you organize into a organization, a church, even, you have to have someone that's worried about paying the bills and the insurance, and then who are the people that have those talents, and then they're kind of looked to as leadership in the branch.
Yeah.
And certain families really influence what goes on in a branch, and it's really hard. I think it's why it's failed for 6,000 years, right? Even when Christ was among the people, once you got into the generations that didn't see him personally, didn't have that testimony, they just dwindled. So within 3 or 4 generations, we're back to where we started, and it's always going to be that way, I believe, until Jesus is with us forever.
Yeah, when you were talking about your church and just have this group of people who get together to worship Christ, I don't feel so much jealousy of you, Mike.
I'm sorry.
I wish I could snap my fingers and be out where you are and meet with you. Oh man, that's wonderful that you have that group.
And so people say, yes, I go to church and I hear scriptures read that I don't agree are even divinely inspired. I think that cause problems. But that's not really the end result, is it?
You can look past that.
Yeah, and that's where I found freedom. It's not that I don't believe there's any truth. I just believe that the truth has been masked by man.
Yeah.
And so it's okay if you believe that. Is that bringing you closer to Jesus? Is it causing you to love your fellow man more? Are you more interested in your fellow man today and their needs than you were 20 years ago? Have those scriptures helped you to do that? If they have, then God's using them to bring you truth in your life, because the gospel is changing you from the inside. Yeah. But I would say most of the time, we're probably struggling with the same old sins we've always struggled with: pride, backbiting, jealousy, envyings, and we're not really getting any better. Matter of fact, our numbers are dwindling. So
that brings me to another question I had is, I was raised with the 10 Commandments. It's kind of what everybody knows. They're put up in courthouses throughout the South. Everybody knows what the 10 Commandments are, right? And that's kind of was the gold standard. If you're doing what's right, you're living your life well. If you're keeping the Sabbath day holy, you're not stealing and stuff like that. But I've been under the impression this last year that Jesus's new gospel trumped the 10 Commandments, and that there's maybe a higher and holier way. And I was wondering for you, what would you say are the big commandments? Whoa. And in the LDS church, the 10 Commandments have even been trumped by other stuff as we go forward, like, don't drink coffee, wear your garments, don't have more than one pair of earrings, all these other commandments that have just almost superseded what were the original commandments. And so I remember sitting in church several years ago, and someone was like, keep the commandments. And I turned to the guy next to me and I was like, what are the commandments? And I couldn't even think about what they were, because there are so many. There's probably volumes of all the LDS commandments. Mm-hmm. If you boil it down to, what are the most important commandments that you believe in for yourself? What are the rules that you try to live by?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a more interesting way, as if I could improve on what Jesus said. But when he quoted the Old Testament, Deuteronomy, I believe, but love your Lord, your God, with all of your heart. Now I think that right there is a lifetime of understanding and work, what that means, and to love your neighbor as yourself, right? Just to treat them the way you want to be treated. People just don't want to hear that that's all there is.
Yeah.
we love mysteries. We love, does that keep my mind busy, those two commandments? Or is it more fun to think about, what if I die and I haven't made it all the way? And then there's some type of progression, and man, what would it be like to have my own planet and to have a marriage in eternity? And, those things maybe entertain our life. And so there's a bunch of noise and things that we just love mysteries, but the real mystery is this. Well, Shane, I shared with you. I just called you Shane.
That's okay. I'm flattered. Thank
Sorry
you.
about that. You looking good today.
Thank you.
I had, I just lost my train of thought. What was I going on, Matt? I'm used to doing this on the flip side. So
no, loving God, loving
Yeah.
neighbor, and instead of adding all the extra stuff onto it, that could be a life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's a miracle. People want to hear, we think of Moses parting the sea. We think of the Hebrews in the fiery furnace that didn't get burned, in these great miracles. I think the greatest miracle that's on an equal plane with those is when the human heart has a change that can't be done by that person that possesses that heart. In other words, you can't have this wickedness in your heart that's been a part of you in your spiritual DNA your whole life, and then have that healed by something you do. It's like a person that has a cancerous growth on their lung and they take it out themselves. You have to go to a doctor that's trained, that has all kinds of special equipment to make sure you're treated. An example of this I shared with you, I had a really bad year last year, Matt, a very bad year, because of some family issues.
Yeah.
And those issues were bad enough within the family. They were horrible, and physical things were done, and spiritual. But the worst thing was my heart. I began to be angry at this person who was damaging our family. And I was taking a tone with my parents, and there was different sides being set up, and people thought they were right. And why are you, tough love versus mercy and justice? All of these things played into my family, not to mention hospitalizations and sicknesses. And I was so angry, just so angry. And it affected my whole life. And I was praying to not be angry, but it was one of those things where it's like, that didn't go anywhere. How do you pray something when you're feeling completely opposite?
Yeah.
And all I can say, and I can't even pinpoint the moment, Shane, but my heart changed, even to the point that this person that was wreaking havoc on our family and causing so many problems, that even got worse. And yet my response, honest response, I say this before God today, was a love and a sadness for him, and just wanting him to be healed and whole. No thought of him paying for what he's done anymore. No cringing or just crying out for justice. Just a sad, just wanting mercy for him, and realizing his life has been rough, as all of ours is. And that's only an excuse up to a certain point. But my point is this: my heart changed. To me, that's every bit of a miracle as Moses parting the Red Sea. I can't explain that. I'm sure people probably have a way to explain it. I can only explain that as the Spirit of Jesus Christ healing me and taking me to a point that I could never take myself. I have to attribute it to the prayers of someone else, because I don't even feel like my prayers were mattering. But I know I was healed from that. Now there's other areas that need the same healing, but that's a miracle to me. And that's the only commandment there is to love other people as yourself, and to love God with all of your heart. And I think those two are so connected that you can't really put steps in there or do this first and then other people. It's just like, as you love other people, you're also loving God with all of your heart.
I can't believe how what you said about your heart changing, that feels so real to me. Like, that's more important than somebody parting the Red Sea, because there's so many things we can do through our own efforts. We can get across that sea if we need to. But to have peace in our hearts, I mean, it just reminds me of all these things that I've gone through, and how that is the most beautiful thing, to have that your heart healed by Jesus Christ. And I think I've gotten a taste. I'm not really good at it, but I've gotten a taste for what it's like to love my neighbors. But I still struggle with wrapping my head around loving God with all my heart. One reason is just because I've never seen him. I've never heard his voice. I pray and I have good feelings. And I feel like he's directed me and I feel like he's healed me, but I don't feel like I have like a personal, like I wrap my arms around my wife or my kids and they're there and I sense them with all of my senses, but I don't have that with God. And how do you actively do the verb love God when you can't sense him?
Well, let me ask you a question. Can you get more of that sense when you picture Jesus as God, who had flesh and who said, who experienced everything we experience, so that he knows how to soothe our burdens and ease our burdens and understand and provide mercy because he knew what it was like? Does that help in your ability to love God? If
No, that's a good question, but I was reading just a couple weeks ago the part in Third Nephi where he appears to the Lehites in America. Jesus does, and they come up, and each one of them gets to touch his hands, put their fingers in his hands, and thrust their hands in his side. And then they all, after they've done that, they all testify that he is the Christ. And he says, remember me, remember this body. You've all seen it and touched it and heard me. And then they take the bread and the wine forever afterwards. Remember. And I'm like, well, yeah, easy for them to remember something that they've sensed with all their senses. It's much harder for me to read something in a book and feel attached. It's like reading about George Washington. Theoretically, I know he was there, but I have no connection with the guy. I'm sorry, I'm being a little bit more, maybe a little.
No, that's funny. You were just saying that. In my mind, I had this example. I'm like, yeah, it's kind of like, like George Washington, our founding fathers that brought us freedom in this land, and we're so thankful for our freedom, but like, I can't really attribute it to them.
Yeah.
Well,
I want to feel that. I just don't know how.
Do you think, I think we, the Holy Spirit, who is also God, gets, I think, the back seat a lot, or is used as a idol. I see a lot of things going on the internet about the baptism of fire and the baptism of the Holy Spirit, and it almost becomes this event.
Kind of Calvinistic. You've made it or not.
Yeah, and do you think that becomes an idol, Matt? That it becomes the focus, and so then questions arise around. Well, have you been baptized by the fire? Have you received?
Are you in the club?
Baptism? Right. Have you? What was it like? How do we strive to get that? What steps do I work to have this baptism of fire? But I do think that that's the purpose of the Holy Spirit, is to bear witness of God. You're right. We can read stories about Jesus and what he says about himself, but that's what they are. But we haven't experienced him. We haven't walked with him. This was I could share a testimony with you if you promise to keep us on track, because I think it kind of, I told you I was married before, and my wife left me, and it was a terrible time. And in these years before I met my current wife, I had some good friends, and I would travel to Nashville with a buddy, and we'd work on music. A friend had a studio there, and I've messed around with music in the past. And so we would take these trips and we would talk about the gospel. It was wonderful. But towards the end of the trip, when we would start driving back to Missouri, I would start getting really depressed because of the companionship and the fellowship I would have. And I knew I was going home to be alone, and I would start to get really depressed. And I've suffered from depression in my life. I think a lot of people do that are on
Yeah.
the artistic side of the brain.
Yeah.
But I remember driving home. It was dark. And this friend of mine, I could tell him anything. I didn't have to hide me. He knew me. And I said, how are we supposed to, we're told we're supposed to love this God. And I said, let me tell you how I see God. I'm walking along a pathway and Jesus comes along and pushes me down a deep, dark well. And I fall to the bottom of this well and there's no hope of getting out of it. And then he reaches his hand down and he pulls me up out of this well, sits me on the ground. And now I'm supposed to be thankful to him. I said, I'd never asked to be born into this crappy world where people get divorced and, you know, children die and all of this horrible things go on.
Yeah.
And now I'm supposed to be thankful to him when I get a little nugget of mercy or a little happy day amongst this depressing world. I'm supposed to be thankful to God for pulling me out of the well when he's the one that pushed me in there in the first place. How do you become thankful to a God that doesn't damn you to hell when, like, I never even had that possibility till you made me, right? And so I'm in the throes of darkness and depression. And you know what's even worse? My buddy looks at me, he goes, man, I can't even imagine thinking that. So now it's like piled on, like I am the son of perdition. Like I've lost all connection to the Holy Spirit. I'm in the dark, deep throes of sadness, depression. And I want to say God healed me right there, but I think he had to let me simmer down a bit. But a couple of days later, I don't remember what I was doing, but I do remember the message. I was thinking about this again in my head, just the same thoughts. Why am I thankful to you? You're the one that put me here in the first place. And this thought came to me and just burned in my mind. I said, you're right. You didn't ask to be born. You didn't ask to be born into this world with sadness, but you never asked to live in eternity with me. And the glory that I have prepared with you is so much better that all of this is going to be just a drop in the bucket. It'll all be worth it. And only a loving God, like our eternity has to be so great and so wonderful that this pain and suffering that we feel that seems like the end of the world and there's just so much of it. And how could a loving God do this? Will all make sense. And I have to have faith and trust in that. Now that's one of those times where my heart went from to completely switched in a moment. And you tell me what, you could take a drug and maybe feel that for a couple hours, but you have to keep taking that drug. You can go get drunk and drink away but when you're sober, all of those thoughts are still there. Nothing heals that. Nothing heals that except something that's supernatural outside of my soul. And it enacted on me and my heart was healed. And since that day, though I have deep, dark, depressed days, that experience has never left me. And it's a shift in thinking. Like I was not able to think that way. That never entered my mind. It was just, I'm a crappy person in a crappy world. And God tells me I'm supposed to be a beautiful person in a crappy world. And I just don't have the tools to be that way. So now the only thing I have to look forward to is hopefully a telestial glory where I can kick around with some other crappy people, but we have some funsies here and there, right? But I'm never going to be with God or Jesus.
Right.
Now that shift, that shifted. And that's another example of a miracle where the heart changes, I believe.
Mike, thank you. I really appreciate that story. I don't know how to express it to you, but I appreciate that. I'm going to come back and watch this video over and over again.
Well, I hope that anyone listening, that the Holy Spirit can bear witness that this is true, or maybe it's not true. But in my life, I can't attribute that to anything else. I can share another testimony. If you don't mind. Just
no, please do.
Keep me on track, Matt, because 18 years old, freshman in college. I'm dating a girl that's in high school that I had a relationship with when I was in high school. And things started to get on the rocks. There was some sickness in the family. I'm laying in my bed at night in my room. I have a college class. I'm going to the university in the morning to go take my classes. Laying in my bed, praying to God. God, is this the girl I'm going to marry? Where am I going to work? Am I going to move to Zion? All of these things that you have, right, when you're 18, your whole future's open. And I was so anxious, so just wondering. And for whatever reason, my great uncle was sick at the time. And this thought came to me. I said, quit praying for yourself. Just pray for your uncle for a minute. So I began to pray for him that he would be have comfort in and get better. And as I began to pray for him, Matt, this sensation started at the top of my head, and it was a physical sensation and slowly went down my body. It was a tingling. It was a peace. It was a beauty. And I remember moving and just like, what is going on? And I started to pray deeper, and I would bring up questions to God. I say, what about my relationship with so-and-so? Is this going to work out? And the answer would be, it doesn't matter, but trust me, trust me. And I couldn't believe the beauty in those words and the power that they had. And I tried to concoct every terrible situation in my life. What if this happens? What if this happens? And it was always trust me. Matt, at that moment, I had no fear of dying. I knew that whatever happened in my life was his will. And it really, you know, those scriptures that say, if I die tonight, I go to Christ. If I live, I live with Christ. I know what that felt like. I could have died at that moment and had zero fear of anything. And I remember rolling over in my bed on one side, and I didn't want to fall asleep because this power was so of peace. Rolling over to the other side, eventually I fell asleep that night. And I woke up in the morning and I thought, man, maybe it was just bad pizza or something. You know, what caused all this? But I kid you not, Matt, I was in this loft. I climbed down out of this bed and went and got my shower. That spirit was still with me. Like, it was powerful. I have arrived. I am ready for celestial glory. God has blessed me. And as the day went on, it just slowly started to withdraw. And it was so sad. And the answer was this is what it is all about. And you're not there yet to live in this way every day. But that was when I was 18 years old.
But you got a taste. You got a glimpse.
Yeah, I'm in my early 50s now. And I have never forgot that standard of what it's like. I wanted to be there so many times. And yet, if I really said that statement again, I probably should say I want to be there so many times, but obviously I don't, or I would be there. What I want is my way. I want things to work out my way. I want to not suffer. I want to have plenty of money. I want to have a job that's mentally stimulates me. I want to be able to afford the next iPad so I can do my computer studies and everything just works so well, right? I mean, honestly, these are the things. I don't want to lose any of that. I don't want my family to suffer. I want to be able to take vacation. You know, all of these wants of the world become our desires. And I think God is standing there saying, if you would just want peace, and you would just want what I have in store for you. As the Book of Mormon says, if you just honestly want to submit to everything I'm willing to afflict upon you for your own good, to make you ready for my heaven, my kingdom, if that's your desire, then you'll have peace because it won't matter. I think this the stress comes when we want something other than what God wants. And it might seem like something good. Maybe I want somebody to be healed that's suffering. I want it so bad. And God says, you don't understand this, but this suffering is going to bring my kingdom about. And you have no idea how, but I know how. And that's my purpose in everything in this world. You know, people read those books and there's books written, how can a loving God allow suffering? You know, how can a God push you into a well and then pull you out and want you to worship him for all of eternity because of this wonderful thing he did for you? Well, that's because the blessing he's wants for you is so great that you have to enter into faith and allow him to work his plan. And those blessings, we just don't have any idea, but we have to believe that that's part of God's kingdom, that it makes everything down here worth it. And I so feel bad for people that suffer and turn their back on God and it just don't understand it. And I get it, man. I think there's a level of pain and suffering that just almost shuts our brain down, right? We can't comprehend how a loving God allows this.
Which I'm sure you see in your line of work.
And really, the body of Christ is called to support those people when they can't support themselves, even if it's a spiritual support.
Maybe that's what mourning with those that mourn means, huh?
Yeah. And we're just not, we're just not set up to do that because of what I said. We all live independent lives in our own little castles and kingdoms, and we are able to get what we need from the world. But really inside we suffer, and it's for lack of relationship with each other, unconditional love, and with God.
And trust. I just love that experience you shared of just that it doesn't matter. Trust me. I mean, just this last month, I've been stressing about something that I'm hoping for in the future that I, could change. I don't know how I live day to day, right? And I have these hopes professionally, hopes with my family, and I just couldn't imagine getting to the point where I could just be like, it doesn't matter. Trust Jesus Christ. That would be such a wonderful point to get to. And when you said that, it feels like it's a true point to get to. It's just, man, getting to it.
Can I share another testimony and keep me on track? I don't want to derail you.
No, we're doing great.
Okay.
We're over an hour. I've got 2 more questions, and let's do this, and then I'll ask my 2 final questions.
Okay. When I was young boy, that little house I told you of, my grandma, the old train depot.
In Ohio?
Yeah, we'd gather there for Christmas and things, and it was old, and I don't even know how these things are allowed, but the source of heat for this house was this metal grate on the floor, and the heat would radiate out of this. But that thing was so hot, right? I was a little baby, and I stumbled and fell, and my hands fell on this grate, and it would, my mom said the blisters were there, and the marks of the grate were on my hand. I was screaming, crying. My dad, and I think it was my dad, or I don't even know if he was an elder then, or my uncle, 2 priesthood members came, put their hands on my head, prayed for me. And mom said I stopped crying immediately and never acted again like those hurt me, even though the blisters were there and popped and they took a long time to heal. I was never bothered by that pain wise.
Wow. I
share that testimony and some of these other ones I shared, and I want to bring something up. I received a letter from a pastor of a very large church not too long ago, and it was a debate back and forth. They were upset with the podcast. I think they thought people were leaving the church because of it, which wasn't true. And in this dialogue, I tried to share some of these things and bear my testimony of Christ. And I shared some, I've had testimonies and these things. And he wrote back and he said, I can't believe you're willing to give up all of these testimonies, all of these things that God's blessed you with, that you're willing to give those things up and trade it all in, by walking away from the church. And I could fathom. I realized this is exactly why we do what we do. You think everything good in our life comes because we belong to the correct church. Yeah. Why would all of these testimonies that I can't deny, that are just as real to me as this desk sitting here, probably more real, because I know what went on in here that I had no power over, that I was suffering from, and it was alleviated by a power bigger than me. How can that happen? And then you tell me that that's because of the church I belong to. And that is the terrible, people say, oh, we don't believe that. Yes, we do. It's evident time and time again. Not all of us, but as a group, as an organization. Mm-hmm. This is a pastor of one of the largest churches there is. And I thought, that's so sad that you think everything good in your life is because somehow you were born into the right family and the right person put you underwater, and you go through the right set of doors on Sunday morning with the right sign on the building, that somehow those blessings are tied to that. And if you walk away from that organization, then all of those things to be true in your life that Jesus has blessed you with suddenly disappear. Like he pulls all those back because you've left a building or an organization. I don't understand that. Well, I shouldn't say it. I do understand it. It's part of the culture that adds things on to the beautiful gospel. And then the church and the organization become salvation and not Jesus on the cross.
Mike, I think you're speaking right to me.
Oh,
I appreciate that, because that couldn't describe any better the situation that people in my place find ourselves in with the LDS church. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. For for your LDS listeners, man, oh, my heart really, I've had just a small taste of, sorry, man. Don't happen very often. I've had a small taste of a small little tiny drop of persecution. And I had the best pastor that deflected most of that. I've had small things, but man, things you guys go through. It's spiritual abuse and trauma. And it's not a light thing. I mean, people go to counseling for years to get over PTSD and trauma and abuse. And it was with the dialogue with this pastor that I used a word that I'd never even thought of. And when I replied back to him, I said, "You're committing spiritual abuse. You're a leader in one of the biggest churches in our movement, and you're using language that says, I highly caution you. I suggest you turn and return." And it's a it's a talking down to, right, principal office moment where I suggest you do these things, step back in line, get with it, or the consequences are, right, eternal damnation.
Yeah.
Spiritual abuse. Nobody has the right to do that to another person, whether it's in the name of ministry or not. There is one person that holds my eternity in his hand. His name is Jesus Christ. And how dare you tell me that you as a man are telling me I'm going to lose everything when the God of creation went to the cross and bled for me? You do not have that power. That's spiritual abuse. And for those of you that have experienced it, I pray that you'll be healed from that.
I really feel what you're talking about right now. And just in my mind, I just hear the word freedom.
Yeah.
I just feel like Christ has the power to break these bonds and to offer freedom. Just wrapping my head around it. I look around at the LDS and the ex-LDS space, and I see so much heartache among people who are trying to find their way. There are so many people who are trying to hold on to the LDS church knowing that there are serious problems. There are people who are afraid to let go. There are people who have let go and feel so empty inside and so like there's something wrong, and they turn to a lot of places to find the answers or to find support. And people who stay in the church believing, they make fun of those people, saying they leave the church but they can't leave it alone. But like you say, this is traumatic. You've had spiritual abuse happen to you, and you can't just walk away from one day to the next without processing it. And processing it for some people can be relatively simple, and for some people takes a lot of time, and some people never can fully process it. And how do you process something without talking it out, without thinking it out? And then hopefully Jesus Christ can heal that and free us from those feelings, and that, being told, that you're evil, that you're dark, because you recognize what's going on and some of the problems, or being told to consider your ways, that you're going to lose your family for eternity because you believe in the Book of Mormon. It is such a damaging thing to have happen. And I'm so touched that you feel, that empathy and the emotion for people.
Yeah, it's crazy. Growing up, is the teasing. You're a Mormon. You believe in the Book of Mormon, and like I said, Catholic community. I had broken up. I've lost 2 really good relationships with women because of their, well, we were girls back then, but because of their parents, Catholics, and not wanting to have anything to do with quote Mormon.
Yeah.
But that just pales in comparison to the people that are supposed to be in your church and your most loving, trusted companions and friends, when they then persecute you for believing in the Book of Mormon, but not believing in other revelations or some of the things Joseph Smith did. That's way worse. That's way worse than the world. You expect things from the world, but not from your closest, confidants and companions.
I can't believe that from one year to the next, I go from people that I've known all my life to now will have nothing to do with me. And that's my community. That's where, and that pretty much just sums it up. Yeah. Anyway,
I had a friend that brought, this is to understand those people. They don't know what to do with you. They don't know what to do with me. And that's because of where their foundation is. And I think that's the greatest sadness, is that when I perceive that I've caused sadness in other people for me. So like when I walk into a room, I'm like that little three-legged puppy, with the ear that's been chewed off, that's living in the gutter, and you drive by them and you want to cry and your heart breaks.
They just pity you.
Right. Sarah McLachlan music, starts in the background, and you're that sick little puppy. And I realize when some people see me that I am that, and it's a pity and it's a sadness. Yeah. But what you said about freedom is it's so ironic, because I don't feel that way about anybody in the church. I'm like, believe what you want to believe. I believe there's a very strict set of rules and laws and order that Jesus wants us to walk down. But if there's certain scriptures and things that speak to your heart and help you understand Christ, maybe I'm wrong, and go for it. But are you loving people more? And are you entering into closer and desiring closer fellowship with your Father in heaven? Or do you have all the answers already, and you've shut your book on this thing called life, and we're just doing what we know to do until we get to where we're supposed to go, right? When Zion's here, and I'll be safe, and everything's fine, and I'll have food, and I won't have to work, and whatever we have in our mind. But that's not, it's just not the way it works.
Yeah, man, this is so great. I'm going to love rewatching this. There are so many things that you've said that have touched me and made me think today. But along that same line, I want to ask you, what is something that you hope for?
I hope to reach a point in my life where I wake up in the morning and the world doesn't act on me, but I act on the world. I desire to have that moment of peace in my life where, as I go out into the world, I am free to not be pushed around in my mind or my heart by things I see and do, because my trust is in God.
Mike, that is brilliant. I could have asked 100 people that question and no one would have answered it like that. I love it.
Well, I told you I like to record early, and we get up. You had to get up earlier because you live in. I'd like to record early, Shane. Gosh dang, Matt, because of, by 2 or 3 in the afternoon or 4, the world's acted on me all day long, and my emotions have gone all over the place, and I've dealt with things, and the freedom's not there yet to rise above that. Yeah. Now, it's not terrible, but sometimes it is.
Yeah.
And I just want the freedom to be able to love people no matter how bad they treat me. I just think when Jesus says turn the other cheek, that means so many things.
Yeah.
But I think like when lifelong friends hurt me, that I can turn around and pray for them with all of my heart and have all the love and compassion without any sense of justice or hurt being there. That's freedom. And that's, I think, walking in the Spirit. And I look forward to that day. That's my hope, that I wake up and I act on the world to put out good, and I'm not acted upon, and that my demeanor and spirit's not changed by the world because of my relationship with Jesus. I'm not saying there's not sorrow. There's still sorrow, but it's a different kind of sorrow.
Yeah. Sorrow for the world.
And that's how I've talked to people about family situation, and they're like, well, aren't you mad? Like, what he's doing is not right. It's like, it's a different sorrow. No, I'm not mad at him for that. I'm sad for him, and I'm sad for the sadness it's causing, but it's all about sin,
Speaking of family, This is my last question I've got. When I was growing up in the church, we were told this is the last generation. It's 11:59 before midnight when Jesus comes. This is it. It's the end. But man, that started to change for me. I think that there's generations to come before the end is here. And doing that makes me have to come to grips with my mortality. I'm going to die someday. And I'm not going to be here probably when Christ comes, probably not going to be twinkled and live forever, but I'm going to have to die. And so suddenly the long game becomes more important. And I think if you agree that you probably are going to die someday, what's something that you want to leave behind that your posterity can know? You look at, your son someday, hopefully you'll have grandkids. What is something that you want them to realize that you knew?
That life is about a person and not an organization. That maybe they would say, dad or uncle or grandpa, he really wanted us to focus on our relationship with the person, and that's most important in how we treat others. It's funny you said. I was driving just I think it was yesterday, and I thought about that, Matt. I was going by a graveyard actually, and I thought, man, like my grandma I told you about, died, and she was such a part of our life, but I don't think about her all day, every day, Matt, unless I have a memory pop up on Facebook.
Yep.
That's just the nature. Like, we die, life goes on, and you become a faded memory in someone's life. And so I thought, so what is important? I just want to reach a point where I live my life by truth. There's no dichotomy between me. Like, I act for what I believe. Maybe that's the best way. He acted the way he believed. He was true to what he believed.
Yeah, you have integrity, true to what you believe.
But I thought, even if these videos are on YouTube until there's no more internet, and my grandkids can watch it, who knows, whatever.
Yeah.
But even that, it's like, so what, man? But I do think eternal little interactions we have with each other, I think interactions we have somehow carry eternal weight. Though we don't understand that yet. But just one moment where the Holy Spirit's there and an interaction between people somehow has an eternal meaning. And I don't know that it's a quantity anymore of how much I can do for God, but whatever I do for God, I hope it's honest, and I hope that it shows love, and that whoever I'm interacting with, that those moments somehow change us, though they'll never remember my name or anything, but something in their heart has changed, and so they are now a better person in their relationship with Jesus. Maybe, the Book of Mormon says the members have the ability to speak the words of Christ, which is the tongues of angels, to each other.
Yeah.
Whether I do that to one person or a million, I just hope that it's actually the words of Christ that they need at that moment that allows them to fellowship.
Yeah.
And Matt, if you talk to one person on a park bench and you say some things and that person carries those with them the rest of their life, and it changes how they see their creator and it leads them down a life of interaction, is that worth it? Whether your great grandkids remember your middle name or who you were, I don't know. You guys have a lot of impetus on family, right? And I really love that about the LDS. But the truth is, like, Matt, your kids, I should want the best for them as much as my kids. And
yeah. I feel like what you say, like our interactions with each other when we feel the Spirit, I just was thinking that's what this morning's been for me. There's things that you've said that I am going to treasure, and I felt things this morning that I am going to treasure. And man, I appreciate this conversation with you.
This is how it works, right? I've listened to your videos, and I can't go back and quote you exactly, but certain thought processes popped up and then were told to me as truth, and now they're part of who I am. And so when people bring up a question, I could try to recreate that. I say, I want you to go watch something and then let me know what it is. That's how we are. Let me ask you a question, Matt. Why did you want to interview me, and why have you been willing to be a part of, or to just come on and share, whether it's my channel or yours? Why? What about it?
Maybe they're two different questions.
Probably.
I think that you're interesting. That's why I want to interview you. You seem like you have such a story to tell behind the subjects and topics of your podcast and your videos, that there's a deeper story there. And so I appreciate you coming on and sharing and giving me a glimpse of who you are. And I think that coming on and doing videos, I look at some of these videos, like you say, who knows how long YouTube is going to be in the world or how long they'll leave our videos up. But I feel like they're bookmarks in our life, that they help to show where we were at certain points and stages in our life. And I can look back and I can see inspirations and I can see progression. I think some things I'll look back and say, wow, that was when the Lord showed me this thing and I wrote it down. And some things I'll look back and say, I've grown a lot since then in understanding and maturity, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
But they're bookmarks that I hope that my kids can see. I was listening to a podcast or a YouTube video that I really admire, not about the gospel, it's about literature. And he said a quote by, I believe, Oscar Wilde, something about how literary analysis, literary criticism is the highest form of autobiography, that we learn and show the most about ourselves when we deal with powerful literature and important ideas. And I think that maybe our kids, or the ones we love, can learn more about us as we deal with these important topics, struggle with who Christ is and what is our relationship with him and what the Book of Mormon means, than if we call them up and talk about the weather. And so maybe that's what these can become. Who knows?
Well, I told you one of the great joys, we've been doing this we're in our 6th season, and the first 4 or 5 years we're just all audio, and you can go back and listen to any of those. Yep. Anywhere you get audio podcasts, same name. But within video, one of the greatest joys has been coming across your channel and meeting you. And there's been so many people we've met and talked to, but your stuff you're putting out, I believe, is exactly what our focus has kind of shifted to, and that's just what's the gospel in the Book of Mormon and how can I grow by that. So I appreciate that, and this has been a great joy, and this is a great reflection of the availability and the potential of the internet and YouTube. All of this, there's if you can guide yourself and stay on the straight path, there's a lot of benefit.
Yeah. And I feel so much more strength in meeting you and other good people that are in this space, and feeling like we're walking this together. We're strengthening each other as we go.
I hope so. I hope we learn to share our burdens, become vulnerable with each other. And I know that's hard to do, not meeting in person, but at least this is better than just writing emails. You actually see people and talk to them.
Definitely.
Yeah, man. I am so joyed by the comments I read on things that you produce and the things we've done together. There's so many more people that you have access to because of LDS background. So when I see, there's so many, hey, I'm learning the same thing. And it's like, you're kind of like one of the few I've met, but on your place, on your channel, there's so many more. And so I hope to get to know those people and just, it's refreshing. It's refreshing.
What a great thing that would be, to get to know those people.
Mm-hmm.
Man, Mike, we should do this more often. Bring somebody else on and talk to them.
Amen. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we've put a good hour and a half into it, and if anybody's still watching, thank you. But this has been great. Thanks so much for coming on and letting me interview like this. And we better wrap this up. But again, I appreciate you. And for anybody who's watching this, please visit Mike Barrett's channel, Restore Gospel Podcast, and I'll put a link down below, and get to know what you're thinking and where you've been and where you're going. And it's a great thing you're on.
Let me add just a little thing at the end. When you go back, and this has been a real journey for us since we did start 5 years ago, over 5 years ago. If you listen to earlier podcasts, we spend a lot of time on certain sections in the Doctrine and Covenants and trying to make them fit the Book of Mormon. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. Our approach is certainly different now. I'm almost ashamed of some of those episodes, Matt, because it's a real world look into someone who's talking about the scriptures every week in the Book of Mormon and starting to change their mindset, starting to change a little bit. And I was when I latch onto something, go, why is everybody not seeing this? And I was a little too fervent, and it came across as maybe arrogance, maybe lack of charity. It was all from excitement. I didn't have bad feelings for other people, but I also felt like I had been taught some things that weren't true. And so there's probably some anger there too, not at any person, but the culture I grew up in. And I thought about taking some of those down. I thought, no, other people have gone through this too. And you know what's really good about a good brother? When they can call you to repentance in a loving way and not be off-putting. And I had a really close friend call up. He's like, hey, I just listened to this episode. He goes, do you think you're being a little hard? And I listened and I thought, yeah, man, thank you. I did not even see that. And so I did apologize on air, I think, on the next episode. But I thought, what if people come and this is all they hear? I don't know. But I thought, I'm going to leave all this up there. It's transparency. And this is, I think, some of the spaces that we all go through when we do wake up. There's some anger, there's some sadness, there's some fear.
I think what you're describing is, to me, it illustrates the difference between why I love a good novel more than I love a nonfiction book. One just is like the culmination of everything spelled out in black and white, and the other one is the journey and the progress. And I think that you leaving up those early videos that maybe you're not, maybe you've changed since then. Someone can go back and look at your progress and see where you've come, and maybe get an idea that you're going to continue to progress in the future, that you're not the guy who has all the answers right now, but you're a work in progress, just like me and just like the rest of us. I think it's refreshing.
Yeah, we had a friend, one of Shane's friends asked him the other day, goes, were they just like trying to get us, bring us in and then like full of swapsy or something and change, because there's things they are talking about now that are different than back then. And it's like, no, that was never the intent. And it's not like you're no longer believing in God, right? There's not like these foundational things that are crumbling, but it's more of I don't know, just little things that mean so much. So,
and as long as we're heading in the right direction, I hope we do continue to change. To think of where I was a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, and I hope that 5 years in the future, you and I will both be in places that are even better than today, and we'll have something to share and talk about then.
Yeah. So, brother, thank you for taking the time it's a little different listening.
It's been so much fun. All right, we'll wrap this up, and thanks again, and we'll talk again soon.
You got it. Bye.